Welcome to the G. Louise book series. I'm Christina Kristina. It's nice to meet you. I hope you're having a good day. It's very, very rainy here today. I need to get my hot chocolate. So don't forget to check in to Star Trek Fridays, my recaps. My also If Then on Fridays. If you like this author, then maybe you like that author. We started with the Bridgertons. So if you like Bridgertons, maybe you like Joanna Lindsay's Mallory's, Stephanie Lawrence Sinsters, and they need to do a series of the Sinsters. They absolutely need to do a series of the Sinsters. And don't forget Flashback Mondays, where we talk about 40 different 30 to 40 different books in Romantic Times Book Review. Mystery, science, inspirational, contemporary romance, historical romance, paranormal, and harlequin. We check it all out. So anyways, today we are on book 16, Murder on Sisters Row, Sarah Brandt and Frank Malloy, and the Gaslight series, Murder on Sisters Row. And be prepared for spoilers, lots and lots of spoilers. I love my spoilers. And you know me, I gotta read half the book to you anyway. So we start the first chapter off. Sarah, Maeve, and Catherine are returning home after spending the day in the market, and there's a carriage in front of their house. It seems a guest of Mrs. Walker is having a baby. And we're not really sure how Mrs. Walker learned of Sarah, but it doesn't matter really. So she goes to the house, and it takes Sarah a while to figure out that it's a brothel. And we should back up here a little bit. If you have not checked in on these books previously, Sarah has a very, very wealthy family, and due to circumstances that we've explained it through the book, so we'll just let it go now because it's really not that pertinent for this one. But she's had a career as a midwife, and that's how she earns her living. She's also adopted one daughter and has another daughter living with her. Maeve and Catherine are now living with her. They came from the Prodigal Son mission. And she adopted Catherine, and Maeve came as a caregiver, and they've become her surrogate children. And Mrs. Ellsworth, the neighbor next door, has become the surrogate grandmother on hands for all teaching of household, how to take care of a house, how to cook, how to clean, how to do all that stuff for the girls, while Catherine is out doing her midwifing. So she gets a call from the guys at the door. Can she come? Mrs. Walker's guest is having a baby. So she gets there, and Amy is the girl having the baby. And she tells Sarah that she must contact Miss Van Owner for her, that Miss Van Owner has an organization that will help her escape. And Sarah's like, well, we could just go now. And she's like, no, that's not how it works. You're not allowed to just walk out of the brothel. And because they have people that will bring you back. So she convinces Sarah all this. And she tells Sarah about the charity organization. It's called, the initials of COS. And so Sarah delivers the baby, and she goes to Mulberry Street to check up on the people. That's the house where that used to be called the Prodigal Son Mission. They renamed the house the Hope House, the Daughters of Hope House, because now it's a house for women. It was originally named the Prodigal Son when the woman's husband had named it, and they're both now deceased. So now other ladies are running it for Sarah, and they have renamed it the Daughters of Hope House. So she goes there to visit, and Sarah asks one of the girls there to take a note to Frank. She doesn't want anybody to know that she doesn't want to send the note to Frank herself, because Frank will get heckled by his fellow officers that he's getting a note from Sarah. So then Frank comes to the daughter's Hope house, and they have a little secret rendezvous. And I'll read a little cute scene that I just thought was cute. Um, uh, Perfectly. Um, where have you been all night? In a whorehouse, Sarah replied badly, in no mood to be disapproved of. If she hoped to shock him, she'd more than succeeded. My God, are you serious? Perfectly. I was called to a birth yesterday, and the mother happens to live in a brothel. She took a seat on the horsehair sofa that someone had donated to the mission long after its usefulness was over. Molloy plopped down beside her as if his knees had suddenly come unhinged. Where? In the Tenderloin, she said, naming the triangular neighborhood north of 23rd Street between 9th Avenue and Broadway, whose northern portion was Longhair Acre. My God, he said, looking at her in utter amazement. Why did you let them take you there? Now he sounded outraged. The young man picked me up in the carriage. All the curtains were drawn, and I enjoyed the privacy and didn't pay much attention to where we were going. We stopped in the alley behind the house, and they took me in through the kitchen and up the servants' stairs to the girl's bedroom. I thought it was a boarding house. He rubbed a hand over his face and muttered something that was either a prayer or a curse. She pretended not to hear. As you can see, I emerged unscathed, but I do have something I want to ask you about. His dark eyes nearly black when he turned to her. You're not going back there, and you're not going to start paying attention to where people are taking you. And you are going to start paying attention to where people take you when you deliver babies. And furthermore, stop it, Molloy, she snapped. I already have a father whose opinions I have to ignore. I don't need another one. Now stop lecturing me and listen. I'm very tired. My patience is wearing thin. He didn't like it, but he pressed his lips together in a thin line and just glared. Good, she said. The girl whose baby I delivered asked me to help rescue her. This time he did curse. Sarah jumped. Are you crazy? He roared. Do you know what happens to people who try to get girls out of those places like that? Yes, they get killed. He already opened his mouth to continue, but her reply stopped him dead. What? You were going to tell me that I could get killed. I know that. Amy told me. Who's Amy? The girl who had the baby. It's a little boy, Molloy, and they're going to take him from her. Of course they are. A brothel is no place for a baby. I'm sure it isn't, Sarah agreed. It would be awfully bad for business, I imagine. Molloy glared at her again. If you're going to ask me to rescue this girl or something. No, I wouldn't ask you. If they'd kill me, they would probably kill you too. They wouldn't kill me, but I'd lose my job. Places like that pay the police to protect them, not kidnap the girls. I hadn't thought of that. I'm sure there's a lot of things you hadn't thought of, like not going to a brothel in the first place. Sarah, I leave it alone. I'm warning you. You don't know what you're getting yourself into. But that poor girl and her baby, she's obviously from a good family and she hates it there. Hates the things she has to do. I can't even imagine what it must be like for her. She's not what you think, Sarah. Those girls are all liars. They'll say anything to get what they want. But you didn't see her. She was terrified of Mrs. Walker. Who? Mrs. Walker. She's the madam, Frank Molloy supplied. Of all the madams in New York, you had to pick one of the sisters, didn't you? The sisters? Yes, maybe you didn't notice, but the house you were in is one of 7 that are just alike. They say 7 sisters came to the city from New England years ago, and each one set up her own house of ill repute. Well, I don't think the madams at the houses next door are really Mrs. Walker's sisters, but they call the street Sisters' Row. I just thought I'd get that out. So Sarah goes to the United Charities building, and she asks to speak with Mrs. Van Orner. And at first, the woman gives her a little grief, but then when she learns that Sarah is Sarah Decker, on the other hand, they get all excited in that they're going to be helping her rescue this girl. And then Sarah goes back to the brothel and has a chat with Mrs. Walker, and Mrs. Walker's like, yes, of course we're taking the baby away. It doesn't belong here. So Sarah has a conversation with her and convinces Mrs. Walker to turn the baby over to Sarah. So then there's a whole plan put in place. In the meantime, Frank gets called up to the chief detective office, who has Mrs. Walker in his office. And after the plan has been executed, Mrs. Walker goes to the police, who she is paying a great deal of money to protect her girls and the street they're on. And she demands that Frank return the girl and the baby back to her, that they belong to her. And his boss tells Frank to do just that because this woman is paying enough money. And I'm like, I know this has happened. I know this existed during this time period, but that's an awful cruel thing. You expected the cops to protect you and to stand up for what was right. And here they are taking money, not only to look the other way, but to return the girl to the brothel. I think that is so horrible. Here she has worked hard to escape and successfully done it, only to have the police, who are supposed to be the good guys, return her. That I'm with Sarah on that. That just doesn't go. So Amy and the baby are settled in a halfway house type situation where these girls are kept until they get on their feet again and can go out in the world and obtain employment. But Amy, the girl that she rescued, announces to everybody that, and when Mrs. Van Orner is there, that she's going to name the child, which was a boy, by the way, after his father, his father's name was Gregory. And Mrs. Van Orner has a hysterical fit because she knows her husband is Gregory, and it's very likely that her husband is the father of Amy's child. So Frank tells Sarah about the situation. I thought this was that page. I guess it's not the right page. It's not the right page, but anyway. So Frank tells her what happened at the police station and how he's not going to tell anything either, but he's going to pretend to investigate the situation because he knows it's not right to return the girl and the baby to the brothel. He knows it's not right. So Frank starts an investigation into the incident, on the outside, and then Mrs. Van Orner turns up dead in her carriage. So now he really has to investigate the crime here. So him and Sarah and do the investigating. And then because only women are allowed in this halfway house, for protection, that's usually a pretty standard rule even today, that men aren't allowed in the houses. So he asked Sarah to go in and do the investigations for him in that particular house. So Sarah questions the other housemates and the other donors involved who are helping the house financially. Then I like the fact that we catch up a little bit with Brian. Frank takes them to Sarah's house so Brian can spend the afternoon with the girls. And unlike Frank and Sarah, whereas Frank's mother, Mrs. Malloy, and Maeve and Catherine, and even Mrs. Ellsworth are picking up on the sign language quite quickly, but Frank and Sarah are the last ones to learn the sign language. So we all need to learn sign language to talk. So we'll try it out. So a cute little, yes, Mrs. Ellsworth agreed eagerly as Maeve set down her cups for Sarah and herself. Oh, wait, that one was for Mrs. She seemed to catch herself and set about vigorously stirring her own coffee. Maeve gave her an odd look, then sat down and picked up the spoon from her saucer. Oh, look, she said in feigned surprise. I have two spoons. Doesn't that mean I'm going to get married soon, Mrs. Ellsworth? Mrs. Ellsworth also feigned surprise, but since she'd set out the cups and spoons, nobody imagined for a moment that she was. She obviously meant the two spoons to go to Sarah. Um, so then Frank informs Sarah that the secretary of Mrs. Owner, who was our deceased victim, was one of the first prostitutes to that she rescued, that Mrs. Warner Van Orner rescued. So there's a whole nother twist. So we have several different twists going on here. Um, and we have a couple of more murders to go through too. So to find out who, oh, I really want to do this. Um, I love her author notes in the back of the book. As I have for many of my stories in the Gaslight Mystery series, I got the idea for the story while researching for an earlier book. I found an interesting passage in a reference book about the New York charity organization. They really did exist, and they built the United Charities building to provide offices for many charitable organizations that were created during this time of rising social consciousness. Mrs. Josephine Charlot, a former commissioner for the State Board of Charities, founded COS in an effort to bring order and efficiency to the various charities because she found many of them to be wasteful and encouraging pauperism and imposture. So, anyways, now that I got that out of my system, um, I'm enjoying the heck out of the series. I hope you're reading along with me. Um, Sarah and Frank are getting closer. Maeve and Catherine are growing up. And Maeve is slowly becoming more involved in some of the cases. Mrs. Ellsworth is our dear lady, and she's going to be. I didn't have too many sayings from her from this book. I'm kind of disappointed in that, but she'll come back. She'll come back with her stuff too. But it's a really good book. We get to see Mrs. Decker for a little bit. She helps out in the cases. Mrs. Decker, Sarah's mom, is going to become more involved in some of the cases as we go along too. So it's a really delightful series. I hope you are enjoying this with me. And don't forget, like I said previously, Star Trek Fridays and If Then Fridays and Flashback Mondays, and of course, my daily book reviews. Thank you.